I'm your host, Ken Allen, and Markings is a program brought to you by your local Lutheran Church. Markings attempts to explore issues and facets of the faith, how people are living and practicing the faith, the Christian faith in the world and in the community. And today our topic, public versus or public and private morality. And to help us explore this issue is Professor Rudy Siebert, who is Professor of Society and Religion at Western Michigan University. Welcome to the program, Rudy. You're no stranger to Markings, yes, for sure. It's always a pleasure to have you on. And, you know, as we look and live in the world as Christians, we see a lot of shifting values and standards and so forth out in the world and in society. And we know, of course, I guess as Christians, what we are called to be, how we are to live our faith in response to the gospel. We talk about right and wrong, we talk about moral standards, we talk about family values, we talk about all of these things. And of course then when we try to apply some of these things, when we step out into society or maybe view the government, we seem to run into difficulty, and maybe we have to compartmentalize or whatever the case is. And as people, particularly Christians, view the society today, or the nation, let's say, or the country, the land, you'll hear certain voices saying, well, let's return to old-fashioned morality. Or we need to build this country on biblical principles. Or we hear voices, too, that tell us that those people who are elected to public office and operate in society, or CEOs in the corporate structure, they're there primarily as managers, and they're kind of in a neutral moral environment, so to speak, so they do the best job that they possibly can, but morals really don't impact on them. So maybe you can get us started by helping to sort some of these things to kind of find out where we really are and where we're going.
Yes. As we are sitting here now, the impeachment process, of course, goes on today.
Yes.
The president's defense comes up today, and so this week, next week, probably, or it could be that some impeachment will take place. And I think that this is, this now in Christmas time, when everybody is supposed to be friendly to everybody,
oh, yes,
it has become very unfriendly. And I think that in the last month that these issues of personal morality and social morality have been all focused in this type of an experience. And I think in order to sort it out, it is important that we know that morality really happens on different levels. There is some kind of a morality which is concerned with property and contracts and with punishment for violating contracts, yes, or property.
Yeah.
There is a personal morality which is concerned with personal conscience and personal guilt and personal goodness and personal intent and, yeah, so on. And then there is this whole field of family morality,
yes,
about divorce or birth control or euthanasia and so on. And then we have civil society, and that is our type of society, which is now globalized, which really never had any morality as far as
civil society never had a morality,
because morality has something to do with the individual and the community really somehow becoming one. And civil society was always characterized by the dichotomy of the two.
I see.
The individual follows his own particular good, his dividends, his profits, and so on. And the universal, the community is somewhat outside there. Well, there was something like a political morality in the state, and the question also about moral behavior, agreements among nations, and so on. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, there are different levels of morality, and they have different weight, I would say.
I see. So what are we attempting as Christians, for example, if we are, let's say we're looking at the president, we're saying maybe he has lied under the oath, maybe he has committed these sexual sins in the White House, and therefore we can apply the personal code of our morality to the President of the United States in that setting and then ask for his impeachment, yeah, or should we take a different point of view? What
I would say that first of all, it seems to have something with family morality, first of all, mm-hmm, if it is true at all, because the president denies it, that he has lied in case of, yes, saying that he had a sexual relationship. And if you take a sexual relationship as a consummated type of a sexual affair, then of course he hasn't had it. He got stuck in the foreplay, so to speak. All the time, all these months, and so on. So, in that sense, legally and maybe also morally, even a canon lawyer would understand what he says. As far as women are concerned, they have a little bit more fused type of sexuality than the focused male sexuality.
Definitely.
Everything may, of course, be already adultery or whatever. But the president, who is a Georgetown student, who has studied under the Jesuits and was a professor there, I think has a right, of course, to argue in terms of legality, and legality is different from morality. There is morality which may not be legal, and there is, of course, legality which may not be moral. So I think he has his full right, and on this basis, he has not, of course, has not had a consummated type of a relationship, and he also, therefore, whatever he said under oath is not perjury.
I see.
And there is, of course, something interesting. It is very often the fundamentalists, the Christian right, which hammers on those things. But as you know, the New Testament, the third rule of the Sermon on the Mount says the old people said you should keep your oath.
Yes.
However, I tell you, don't take any oath at all. Say yes, yes,
or no.
No, no. And what is beyond that is from the evil one. That means to take an oath is satanic.
I see.
It is, of course, very ironical that we put our hand on the book there.
And take oath.
On the Holy Book, and take an oath, while the book itself forbids to take an oath. So I don't know how they deal with this, but there are Christian groups, there have been Christian groups which took that very seriously. So there is a question mark behind this whole oath business. And it seems that the whole process of impeachment now concentrates on this perjury, but in many ways it is a very questionable point which they make.
Yes. As a citizen, though, as a Christian citizen of the land, do I have a right to expect a certain kind of morality, or a certain kind of honesty, or certain kinds of traits among those who I elect for public office, or those who represent me?
Yes. If one sees different levels of morality, it does not mean that the lower levels are not important. And therefore, I think the integrity of anybody who enters office is a very important issue. But I think one has to see the following thing. The more successful somebody is in civil society, we do not even have a name for the character. We have to use a French name, the bourgeois. The bourgeois is somebody who is concerned with his own pleasure, with his own profit, with his own dividends.
Yes.
If he enters the family morality, he really has to convert. If he does not change his selfishness and his greed, he will destroy the family.
Oh, sure.
And I think what happens too is that the bourgeois, when he enters office, when he acts as a citizen, as a citoyen, that he also has to transform his personality, because the state is concerned with the common good, not with the private good.
True.
And I think what happens very often with our politicians is that that bourgeois in there breaks through when they are supposed to be citizens. That means they are supposed to be concerned with the common good, but suddenly that selfishness, that greed or whatever, breaks through, and that is what we call corruption.
I see. So basically, when we elect people to office, or people who are serving and appointed as well as elected positions, we should be more concerned with the morality in the sense of their function, in terms of how are they carrying out the demands or the strictures of that office, correct? That's our concern, not necessarily their private life, or whether they're beating on their kids, or being unfaithful to their wife, or mismanaging their checkbook, or cheating on their tax, or the tax. That's kind of a public thing. I mean, what I'm saying is we then have to make this differentiation between private and public, I guess.
Right. I mean, we expect that he functions as a citizen. And that is a very high expectation, because we expect that he gives up, at least for the time in which he is in office, his bourgeois existence. He should not then deal with let's see, real estate, or with Monica, or whatever. He should now be devoted. Now, in the case of President Kennedy, or this present president, nobody can deny that they are citizens, that they are devoted to the common good. but it seems in both cases, particularly as far as the sexual life is concerned, that the bourgeois broke through. But we have to be aware, you know, that on one side we preach, be aggressive, you know, go ahead, and greed is good and selfishness is good. Suddenly we tell these people, now you have an office, now you're not supposed to be selfish anymore, now you're supposed to be concerned with the common good. So it is a very, very high expectation, and we should somehow be afraid that this expectation will be sometimes disappointed, because it is such a steep type of a demand. And then I would like to say, since Augustine, the Christian community, since Augustine, we always emphasize sin, 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 but not the suffering of the people. If we are interested in the sexual sins of Kennedy and the sexual sins of Clinton or whatever, I think we should also sometimes think how much suffering is bound up with this office and with this White House and so on. If we look how these presidents go in and come out for 8 years later, they have aged 20 years or whatever.
Yes, they have.
So obviously that would be a good balance. I mean, for Christian theology in general, not to so one-sidedly talk about sins all the time, but maybe to balance it by saying what suffering the sinner had to go through in the context in which he sinned, whatever he did.
Yeah.
So, and then number two, since Augustine, we have always, we are tremendously emphasizing the sexual stuff all the time. That means the personal sins instead of the structural sins.
Yes.
Let's take the Kennedy time, while he had this East German woman and he had this mafia woman and so on and so on. At the same time, there were things, you know, which were on a much more, a much heavier level. Let's see the order to invade Cuba, the order to assassin Castro, the order to assassin Diem and make a coup, the start of the Vietnam War and so on, which cost 1 million people's life in the North and 56,000 men of our own and 60,000 American soldiers who killed themselves after the war. Now this is so unbelievable in terms of its scope, that I don't want to play down, you know. Of course, unfaithfulness to one's wife is a horrible thing.
Well, sure it is.
But there is horrible and there is more horrible. And I think that what I meant with levels of morality, that one keeps them apart. If you look at the German tragedy, the German bishops were fascinated by Hitler because he would get rid of pornography, of homosexuality, of men and women bathing with each other. And the bishop said, hallelujah, this is beautiful.
The kingdom of God is here.
Well, he purifies the German soul, you know. At the same time, the concentration camps were going, cheap labor for the corporations, 35 cents an hour for the concentration camp people, which finally changed into death camps and so on. And the criminal invasion of Norway and Belgium and Holland and Russia and so on. And the bishops had nothing to say. So I think, you know, it is good to say something about chastity in marriage or faithfulness or whatever, but one must not therefore now put so much energy into this. I think it's a psychoanalytical problem.
Yes, I think so.
That one has no energy anymore to be concerned with these horrible things where millions of people lose their lives.
On a very low kind of level, I think to myself, if I have a plumbing problem in my house, and if I call a plumber, I certainly don't have him fill out a questionnaire on his personal religious beliefs, nor his sex life, nor his business practices. But if I know, for example, that he is a competent plumber and will come in and fix my problem, whatever it is, satisfactorily, that's all that I'm interested in, and he gets an A from me. So maybe as we look at the private and the public sector, making this kind of distinction, as you're talking about, can be helpful to us in having realistic expectations of these arenas of living.
And in no circumstance do we want to create the impression that because we stress political morality in office and so on, that we want to neglect the family morality. It's in such bad shape too, anyway. So, but it is important to keep that balance between the two, I think, right? If you look at the counterplayer of the president, you know, Starr, for instance, there you seem to have an example of morality, of purity, of legality, and so on.
Yes.
But this has its problems too. You see, he has for his role model Thomas More. You know, Thomas More is this great man whom he wants to imitate.
And when we think of Thomas More, we think of a very honorable, righteous man who even was canonized, and one who even stood up to the King Henry of the Eighth,
that is
and lost his life for it.
That is his image.
But what else do you know about Thomas More?
Do we want to say it really? But I mean, this is what Starr has in mind. He wants to have this integrity of Thomas More, you know, the Lord Chancellor, and so on. But if we look into his life, you know, Thomas More wanted to become a priest. By the way, Starr wanted to become a minister. See, there is this whole holy background there. And so then he decided that it would be better to be a chaste husband than an unchaste priest. There were many of them at that time. So therefore, he then went into law and so on. And he was certainly a noble humanist, friend of Erasmus, and a pious Christian and so on. But there were some problems. One problem, because of which he was canonized only 400 years later, was that after his first wife died, he married a second one, but already after 3 months. And for Rome, that did not look very holy. So therefore, he had to wait for 4 weeks.
I see.
But for 400 years.
For 400 years to be canonized.
We don't want to play it down. So 400 years. But so he married the second wife. It was entirely legitimate. He thought she was old and ugly, but that didn't disturb him. As far as his sex life is concerned, it was a little problematic, but he emphasized the affectionate side of marriage life, and this is all right and so on. But there is one thing, and I wished the canonization had been postponed because of the other issue. See, this other problem, which may be much more dangerous than whatever, you know, has to do with sex. And that was when he was Lord Chancellor, he prosecuted and persecuted heretics. That means brothers of a slightly different faith.
That's right.
And he sentenced them to death. And he then sentenced them to death by burning alive. And so on. Now,
like doing your toast in the morning.
This type of purity, you know, there is something dangerous to it. And since Freud, you know, we know how these things work inside. And so even if somebody then wants to be holier than holy in such a process like Starr and so on, even that is problematic. So, I mean, we don't want to, nobody in this country thinks that the president, including the president, thinks that he has behaved well. So, I mean, we have a complete agreement, you know. But I think we should differentiate from this, you know, how his political morality is, and I think he has acted very skillfully. If you think in Haiti, it's the first time that he threw a general out who had been trained in the School of the Assassins, which for 50 years no president had done. You see that he brought that liberation priest in Haiti and so on. The first time that there was a new solution to these 25 invasions which we had before. And also, you know, in terms of his main task, you know, that at this, we had in Venezuela, the left one yesterday, right? You know, that Blair is, of course, his task is to remove neoconservatism from England. And Schröder in Berlin is doing the same thing. And the president is supposed to do the same thing here. And I think what the neoconservatives do, it is they just want to go out with a big bang. That's all. Because there's nothing to be had anymore. So, of course, the president delivered to them, you know, this weapon of his sexual immorality, which they used, you know, and abused in all dimensions, and they still haven't stopped with it. But I don't think it will rescue them. It will just damage the polity further.
Too bad.
And so on,
Well, I think as far as the public is concerned, I think most of us are getting a little sick and tired of the whole thing. And we'd like to get on with the business of what the country has to do.
But you see, I got a haircut today, and this is where you always get the truth, you know.
In the barber shop,
you get the truth.
I'll have to interview a barber.
That's right. And I found out there that there are a lot of people who say, you know, this is all too much, but then they like to hear it too.
Juicy.
even if they don't know, where Bosnia-Herzegovina is, or whatever, they still know what sex is, and it's easier to understand than all the other things where the president has been involved in the Near East and in former Yugoslavia and many other fronts where he has done excellent things, but then, sex can overshadow. I think it's a mass neurosis. This mass neurosis can overshadow things so that one doesn't see anymore. I mean, in the last month, it was sickening, whenever the president made a step in terms of the common good and so on, always they came back again, like in a neurotic attack. They came back again to this sex business there.
All this broke out nearly a year ago in January, and we're still messing with this stuff. And I suppose we'll continue, if not with this, mess with other things. But I think a lesson that's coming through to me as a Christian, that I have to look at the world with a grain of salt and realize that we certainly live in a fallen world that is racked by sin, and we don't live in a perfect world. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive, I think, for the best that we can do, and certainly strive for the right as opposed to that which is not, but at the same time to recognize that we are all, we're all in one boat.
We have to.
We can't.
To be upset about things is one thing, but then the analysis is very important. And as we said, in the president, like in Kennedy before, somehow the bourgeois broke through. The bourgeois is a member of civil society. If you look at the prophets, from the very beginning, all the Jewish prophets, all the Christian prophets, the Islamic prophets, they are all critical of civil society. If you take Popper's book, The Enemies of Open Society, they were not enemies of civil society, but they were from Sodom and Gomorrah on. They were all opponents. They were critical. And the same thing is true for our great philosophers. Plato wanted to rescue the state from civil society because the bourgeois penetrates the family and destroys it, and he penetrates the state and destroys it. And Plato was not successful. And Athens broke down under the pressure of civil society. It's like a cancer which eats the organism and then dies with it. And Rome did not fall because of Germanic, our ancestors' penetration or whatever, or because of Christianity or whatever. It died because civil society emptied it out from inside and it destroyed it, Suddenly we had wrestlers in the Senate. Suddenly we had wrestlers as governors and gladiators, These are issues of decadence which come out of civil society. So I think that now the churches, if they want to fulfill a prophetic role, they have to zero in on civil society. Let's see, at least to make a contribution to all those who want to tame it.
I see.
I mean, our state should tame civil society. But if you see the dismantling of the Rockefeller monopoly in 1911, and you look now on Exxon,
that's a new one,
these are two parts of what has been dismantled, are coming now together and are bigger than the original monopoly was. Then you will see that the state gets weaker and weaker against civil society.
So what I hear you saying, that one ethic, certainly one moral that we should have as Christians, that the state is very useful and very needful. For at least keeping things in order and to the decency so that people can live together and work together and survive.
Well, for a long time, the church was a bedfellow of the state, as we know. Well, I mean, the citizen is at least somebody who's concerned with the common good. I would say it is easier for a Christian to deal with the citizen than with the bourgeois, who is a selfish creep,
Sure.
So, since modern time, the church has moved from the state into civil society, and this is a completely different picture then. And I think if the church wants to play a prophetic role, it has to be critical of what is happening in civil society. And we have in this area here, we have these things there. There is the priest Coughlin, who tried to bring Christianity and fascism together. We have this Carl Schmitt, the political theologian of Hitler, who wanted to bring Jesus and harps together, the great bourgeois philosopher. And now we have recently a priest in town who wants to bring Jesus and capitalism together. You cannot serve two masters. You will either love God and hate capital, or you will love capital and hate God.
I see.
how there is no logic from Aristotle to Hegel which makes it possible to get Jesus from Nazareth together with capitalism. You either don't know what capitalism is, or you don't know what Jesus of Nazareth had taught. I don't see why we have to do these experiments, particularly in this area here, after we have seen that this can only fail. Christianity can only have a critical attitude towards civil society if it wants to remain faithful to its Jewish prophetic roots.
How does the church then equip its people? How do Christians, personally respond then to? Are they always critical, primarily of the? Do they have to be critical of the civil order of society? Stand in judgment of society? Is there room also for the servant role? And the other particular issue I think that bothers us is that whether we like it or not, the church today is beholden to a certain amount of society and capitalism for its survival, for its maintenance of programs, and so forth.
Yeah, don't understand me wrongly. I mean, I see that there has been a need for accommodation. The non-appearance of the Messiah, the parousia delay, made it necessary for the Christian community to accommodate itself to the Greek, the Roman society, Germanic society, the American society, and so on. So that the church accommodates to civil society in a certain way, as much as it can. The question is where accommodation moves into betrayal.
I see.
And where one gets, Judas got $30 there for betraying his master.
Yes.
And if one is paid by the corporations, $3 million or whatever, this is betrayal. And I think we should differentiate in terms of the spirit. We should accommodate, but we should not betray to the Jewish origin. Of the church, the prophetic origin, right? I mean, now the churches are free associations. You can be a good citizen without being a Christian and so on.
Certainly.
So therefore people can decide to be in it or to be out of it.
Yes.
But I think we should be honest. So if we are still part of the Christian community, I think we should share in its prophetic mission, and on this basis only a critical attitude towards civil society. Not necessarily the family, not necessarily the state.
No, but
civil society in between and the bourgeois type.
Because we see civil society today is primarily fired on by greed, I would say, wouldn't it?
It always was.
It always was.
I mean, if you see, we have city-states since about 3,000 years before Christ, and at a certain point, civil society moved between the family and the state. And in Sodom and Gomorrah's story, you see it there. You see the bourgeois alienates himself from nature, he alienates himself from the family, he alienates himself from the state, and destroys all three of them. Ecology problem, you see.
Yeah, our time is running out. So morality, public and private, I think we've come to see that maybe we have to look at this on different levels, and it's not a kind of a deal where one size fits all size. On behalf of your local Lutheran Church, thank you for watching Markings, and hopefully you will tune in again next week. Thank you, Rudy.
You're welcome.
Short on time. Yes, we could easily extend this for another